A phone with the Snapdragon 845 at €300 sounds unbelievable. But is it really? And most importantly, can the rest hold up to the point where there's no reason to buy any other phone? Well, we'll see. Hey, I'm Brian and this is the Pocophone F1. I'm going to structure this one a little differently, as I also want to say some words to what I think of the positioning of this phone. So in that sense, let's start right with the main selling point, the specs. Though as this is really the main attraction, you probably already know that it packs the Snapdragon 845, 6GB of RAM and 64 or 128GB of storage. The carbon fiber special edition of this phone has 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage, but you can't realistically buy that anywhere. And performance on this phone is, as you would expect, on par with €800 flagships. It's really refreshing, especially if you come from another similarly priced mid-range device with its inevitable hiccups. It's not the same as the OnePlus 6T, I would say. The MIUI skin is just too heavy for that, but it's definitely on a level with the S9. So everyday tasks are very fluid, and if you search for an affordable way to play games as smooth as you're gonna get, look no further. This is also because of the huge battery inside that easily lasts beyond a day. Really, 2 are no problem, with screen on time easily exceeding 7 hours. The phone also charges pretty fast with the included fast charger. Not as fast as a OnePlus phone, but it does so with compatibility for Qualcomm's Quick Charge 4, which means that you can also charge it with third-party accessories. Fast and flexible, except for the lack of wireless charging, though that doesn't bother me at this price. What's not understandable for me is that there's no NFC, which means no mobile payments. Depending on where you live, this might not be an issue, but I find not being able to use Google Pay inconvenient, and I'm sure many people in the West who use it would agree. And that leads us pretty well into the rest of this phone, where corners were cut. I mean, look at the price. It can't be all sunshine and rainbows. Let's start with the screen. It's a 1080p LCD panel that definitely gets pretty bright, but it does so with colors and black levels that are just not even close to the OLEDs or even better LCDs on more expensive phones. It's not worse than anything else at this price, but also not better. And then there's the super wide notch. I generally don't mind notches looks-wise. You can hide this one in software if you want to, of course. But when they compromise ease of use, it gets frustrating. Because the space on both sides is so small, you can't see icons for notifications, like not just less, none. So you miss stuff because you just don't notice. There's also no room for a Bluetooth indicator, so you can't easily tell if your headphones are connected. There's also other small software things, like not being able to expand notifications on the lock screen, the aggressive background limiting of apps that only shows notifications upon opening, or the weirdly organized settings. But apart from this, I was actually quite positively surprised by MIUI on top of Android 8 on this phone. A Pie update is just around the corner, by the way. The look really isn't that bad, and even with forcing myself to use the stock launcher, it's really usable. And the magnitude of customization is pretty huge with things like system-wide icon packs and so on. From software design, let's move to hardware design. The device itself is pretty unassuming. The front with the big notch I talked about before and the high chin that hides a notification LED looks reasonably modern. Thankfully there's a headphone jack and of course the USB-C port on the bottom. The speaker next to it forms a stereo pair with the earpiece to produce what I would call above average sound. That's pretty nice to see. The phone does have dual SIM support with the option to exchange one of them for a microSD card as well. The back and sides are made from matte plastic. That brings us right back to how phones were a couple of years ago. But I'll gladly trade the glass construction of other mid-rangers for the 845 in this one. It's sometimes claimed that this phone is splash resistant, but I wouldn't trust that since there are no rubber seals to be found anywhere. And then, above the very fast fingerprint sensor on the back, are those two cameras. The main one is a 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.9 aperture, and the second one is only a 5 megapixel sensor for depth information. Neither has OIS. I think you will start to notice a trend with the images. They tend to have a rather cool color temperature, and the colors are more washed out. The dynamic range is also not that high, meaning that highlights are easily blown out while shadows get crushed. That said, daylight photos will still look good, especially without a side-by-side comparison. But in less ideal or darker conditions, the deficiencies I just mentioned become more evident. I just can't say that the photos will always be usable. This is not a flagship camera. It's not even as good as the OnePlus 6T, but it's above mid-range level. The 20 megapixel selfie camera is a similar story, but in a different way. The photos look as if they have a filter that exaggerates contrast. The portrait mode is not spectacular, but what I would expect. And be sure to turn off the beautification on the front camera. You can't do that on the back one for some reason, so just don't take photos of faces with that one, I guess. The face recognition that accompanies the front camera is very fast though. Also a big positive is video recording. The phone records 4K at 30 FPS and even 1080p at 240 FPS. Those two things are uncommon or even unseen at this price. And while the video itself shares some of the qualities of the photos, it's at least very sharp. Lastly, two things that come with buying a Chinese phone. If you're from Europe, this phone will connect to the LTE network just fine, but it does not support US LTE bands, something that you folks from across the Atlantic should definitely bear in mind. And what everyone has to consider is that this phone still doesn't stream HD Netflix or Amazon Prime Video, since it's missing the needed secure keys. And that's probably also not getting fixed with the update to MIUI 10. So the gist you can get from all of the points I just covered is this: there's after all still a reason why other phones cost more than the F1. The cameras and the screen aren't that good, the phone doesn't feel super premium, and there are just small annoyances here and there that come with using a phone that has lots of corners cut. So unlike what some people may think, there's still a justification for phones like the OnePlus 6T. The perceived experience just takes another step up. The F1 very much reminds me of the OnePlus One, a no-thrills, specs-only device. The problem is that the OnePlus One came at a time where specs were a much bigger selling point. Now we have advanced cameras and screens and so many extras that didn't exist in 2014, but that we now come to expect and that the F1 just doesn't have. In this way, you'll find yourself caught up in comparing this to other flagships, but that's not what you should do, because a comparison to other phones at the same price reveals how strong this device really is. The performance of this phone is truly something you would never get in any other mid-range device, especially because that's most often the Achilles heel of phones at the €300 price point. But that's the thing. It's otherwise still a mid-range device, just with a faster CPU, which doesn't make it that out of this world after all. So is it pointless to buy any other more expensive phone? No. But is it pointless to buy any other phone at the €200 to €400 price point? Definitely yes. Thanks to Trading Shenzhen for giving me the Poco F1 for review, and if you want to buy one, which is not a bad idea if you're searching for a phone at this price, then you can do that through the link in the video description. They also have a bunch of other cool gadgets from China that are worth checking out. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, you know which buttons to press, and don't forget to press that follow button on Twitter. I'm Brian, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.